Yes, I'm sick and I lost my voice, so if my voice cracks, that's why. But have you noticed the deeper message behind Matthew chapter 8 when Jesus heals a leper and a centurion's servant? Because one day it just hit me. These two stories are not only connected, but they're two sides of the same coin. But you have to catch what happens next. Jesus looks at the Israelite crowds following him. Then he says something very harsh. He says that the sons of the kingdom will be cast into outer darkness. That is the key. But like me for many years, many people don't understand what Jesus really means here. Who are these sons? Why are they cast out? Why mention them right now? And what kind of faith is Jesus really looking for? In this video, we're going to walk through this passage and we're going to highlight 8 observations that are commonly overlooked. And these will help us make sense of this entire passage. This is all about faith, and you're about to see why. Let's dive in. Welcome to Above Reproach Ministries. I'm Jason Camacho, and we're in Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 1. We're going to make it down to verse 13. Please do like this video and subscribe if this content blesses you, and leave a comment letting me know what you learned or what stood out to you in this study. In summary, for those who don't want to stick around, Jesus is saying if you're not part of his heavenly kingdom through faith, you're going to be very disappointed. And so we're going to walk through each of these key points, make sense of what Jesus is really saying here in Matthew chapter 8, with the centurion, with the leper, and hopefully all of this will make so much more sense. I recommend you watch the entire Matthew series if you have not already. So in verse 1, Jesus coming down from the mountain after the Sermon on the Mount comes to a close. It says, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. Now we saw these crowds were astonished and amazed, not necessarily that they understood or even received in faith what he was saying. And that's important to distinguish. So the first thing we need to recognize is this is very reminiscent of Moses coming down from Mount Sinai with the laws of God, with the instructions from heaven. But this time, there's something different going on. See, the crowds were with Jesus on the mountain during the Sermon on the Mount and were able to come down with him. Whereas when Moses came down the mountain with the laws of God, they couldn't go up with him. He had to come down to them from God. So there's a clear distinction going on between what Jesus is doing in this new covenant versus what Moses did in the old and how Jesus fulfills that. Verse 2, and behold, a leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will. Now, earlier in chapter 7, we saw Jesus talk about those who say, Lord, Lord, didn't we da-da-da-da? But now we have a real a person in need of great healing. He's desperate. He's a leper. He's an outcast. And he's saying, if you will, you can make me clean. And here's what I want us to remember is back in chapter 6 when Jesus said, hey, when you pray like this, Lord, whatever you will, essentially, let your will be done here on the earth as it is in heaven. And now we see a leper coming before Jesus saying, if this is what you will, go ahead and do it. And Jesus is about to do the will of the Father in heaven here on the earth by cleansing this leper who recognizes the authority and the lordship of Jesus. Verse 3, he says, you can make me clean. That's very important to understand, is he understands what Jesus can do. He's not necessarily dictating what Jesus should do. He's just requesting. He's petitioning. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. We see the same idea in chapter 17, verse 9, when Jesus comes down the Mount of Transfiguration. We're about to see Jesus tell the leper something that seems very odd. You just healed this man, celebrate, tell everyone. But Jesus says, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. Now, there are several questions we should have as Bible students. Why does he need to show himself to the priest specifically? Where do we see that outlined in the law of God? And what is the gift this leper should be offering now that he's been officially clean by Jesus? When I brought this to the Mount of Transfiguration, what I failed to mention is that the connection is that Jesus will tell the disciples, don't tell anyone what you just saw on the Mount. Something very similar is going on here. And there's a true cleansing happening. That's the second thing. The first observation was Moses, very reminiscent of his ministry. And if you want to look at our previous episodes on how I think Jesus is a better Moses, go watch those. But the second observation is there's a true cleansing. So the leper's uncleanness, if you notice, is not transferred to Jesus. The text does not explicitly or directly say that, nor allude to that. There's no hint of, and the uncleanness was transferred to Jesus. But Jesus does stretch out his hand and he touches him, which is the way that uncleanness is transferred per the law, by contact. Instead of the uncleanness being transferred, it's the purity of Jesus that's transferred to the leper. So in this situation, which is very much unique, and this never happens, purity overcomes impurity. Again, that never happens. It's always impurity that corrupts purity by contact. And here's the third allusion, or the third observation. There's an allusion to Sinai. Considering how this is an allusion to Moses coming down with the laws of God and the teachings of Torah from Mount Sinai, when God first comes down to Israel on Mount Sinai, he tells them to cleanse themselves in preparation for his arrival. Now we see Jesus. He's not telling people to cleanse themselves for his arrival. John the Baptist has essentially made way for that and said, get ready, get baptized, he's coming. That's what that was an image of. Now we see Jesus cleansing someone after coming down the mountain himself. And this isn't people physically cleansing themselves in preparation for God's arrival on Sinai, but God is the one doing the cleansing himself. By coming down in human form from heaven. The physical cleansing here with the leper being cleansed of his leprosy, it represents the spiritual, deeper cleansing that we need from Jesus. And so the big question becomes, hey, wouldn't Jesus technically be unclean? Even though his touch cleansed the man of his impurity, doesn't he still need to follow the Mosaic law because he came in contact with something that was impure? And technically he did touch the man. Even though the man became clean, Jesus still would have had to abide by the purity laws in the Torah if he came to fulfill the law, right? So Matthew never tells us, though, that Jesus was declared or made unclean for that day, and he doesn't say that he wasn't. That's just not a detail Matthew's concerned with. He's concerned with the leper is immediately cleansed. And this is where we see once again Jesus is the better Moses. That's the fourth observation. Moses couldn't make clean by his word, nor could the law of Moses. The law of Moses declared something unclean or clean if it met the requirements. But this word from Jesus declares clean, whereas in the Torah, the word would have to come by the priest to officially make someone cleansed. So there is a story where Moses, his sister actually gets leprosy, and Moses can't heal her. He can't declare her clean, nor can the law. They have to wait for the necessary period of time to pass before she can be officially cleansed and come back into the camp. So even though Jesus' authoritative word declares the leper clean and effectually makes him cleansed, Jesus still requires the leper to abide by the law of Moses and present this right here, this gift, show yourself to the priest, because he hasn't come to abolish the law. He's come to fulfill it. So in this way, Jesus is doing what Moses, what God said through Moses, but on another level, it's as though Jesus is going above and beyond the law by declaring the leper cleansed himself, by making him clean as the better Moses. But Jesus is not violating the law. He requires the man still to do as God instructed. Jesus doesn't bypass the priest's official approval. They're still under the old covenant, so there's need for that. So we go to the centurion now. I want us to be thinking of this uncleanness and cleanness and purity laws and what's allowed and what's decreed, all of that on our minds as we read the centurion's story. Now, when he'd entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord," just as the leper begged, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home." So what are you doing here, buddy? Why did you make the journey all the way here on the small chance that this Jewish rabbi would do something for your suffering servant? He's suffering terribly, and he said to him, "I will come." Just like he said to the leper, "I will be healed." And he touched him. And he intends to heal this servant by coming under his roof. But notice the centurion's kind of pushback. The centurion replied, and this is where we start to get a glimpse of what Jesus means when he says the sons of the kingdom will be cast out. Keep that in mind. The centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. He recognized him as Lord, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. Whoa. Unlike the leper who allowed Jesus to touch him, who didn't fight it and go, no, I don't want to make you unclean, and that would have risked the ceremonial purity of Jesus, this centurion is not willing to risk making Jesus unclean by bringing him under his roof. And in this sense, he's unworthy to have Jesus, the Lord, come in his home because the centurion's a Gentile. So both of these miracles, if we think about the centurion and what Jesus is about to do to heal his servant, and the leper, both of these miracles involve someone who is desperate, kneeling before Jesus, believing he can heal, and they involve some dimension of ceremonial impurity, or that's at least in view. The centurion does not want to compromise Jesus's ritual purity. He says, only say the word. That's going to be important for the calming of the storm in the next story. But this is the fifth observation. The centurion has this all planned out. He has faith for a word. He has enough faith to believe for an unconventional way of healing where no contact is required, and Jesus won't have to make the journey. We have not seen any healing in Matthew's gospel yet where Jesus heals by a word. So the question becomes, where did the centurion get this belief? We're going to see a similar story where Jairus, a local synagogue ruler, he's going to ask Jesus to come into his home and heal his daughter, rather than just believing Jesus can heal with a word. This is a very different situation. And he says, I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go. This is important. And he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. The centurion recognizes Jesus' authority enough to know you can command things to happen just by your word, just by you decreeing it, it will happen. Your words change reality. Where that belief came from, when Jesus heard this, he marveled. And this is not Jesus kind of hiding his omniscience and being like, I knew this, but I didn't really. He truly is marveling. He's astonished. And he said to those who followed him, this is where we find our interesting passage, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. Why does he specify no one in Israel? Because here we have the crowds who just heard the sermon, followed Jesus down the mountain, which could include those who started following him at the bottom of the mount. So it's not like everyone in the crowds heard the sermon, but here we have Jesus looking at the crowds and saying, here's our sixth observation, I've found unexpected faith in an unexpected place. This tells us Jesus is looking for faith, and specifically from a certain people, the nation of Israel, the lost sheep of Israel, and he isn't finding it. But now he found the faith he came from heaven looking for, and it's outside of the nation of Israel. The people who should have had it don't. Now we have a Gentile who has the faith, who technically is an unclean individual ceremonially. He can become a proselyte and all that, but we don't know if he is. He's just a centurion who believes in this Jewish rabbi. We have a Gentile who has the faith Jesus is looking for, but the Israelites don't. The most unexpected person has faith, while the most expected people don't, the religious people. And later on in Matthew's gospel, we'll see Jesus leave the 99 to search for the one. We'll see the wedding feast parable where the king tells his servants, go and find anyone to bring to the feast. We'll see the kind of servant Jesus is looking for in chapter 24. And I highlight all of those passages in Matthew because it shows us Jesus is on a mission to find something. And it's right here. I have not found such faith. We'll see in Luke's gospel, Jesus will say, when the Son of Man returns, will he find this kind of faith? This is similar to Abraham's story when he entered a pagan region, the king Abimelech of the Philistines, Abraham assumes no one fears God here. There's no fear of God in this place. And he's incredibly surprised to be proven wrong. And the Philistine king Abimelech and his people have faith. They fear God. And if we're tracking with Moses, Jesus being the better Moses and a better Joshua as well, remember the spies are sent into Jericho and they find unexpected faith from a woman, a pagan Gentile prostitute named Rahab, who believes in the God of Israel, and she and her family are preserved. And the centurion here seems to reflect that very idea and embody that same kind of unexpected faith. Now look at what Jesus says. As if he could have just stopped there and be like, okay, that's offensive and insulting. Let's move on. He really twists the knife. I tell you, many will come from east and west. And I want us to be thinking about, in the beginning of Matthew's gospel, there's a group of people that come from the east to find the Messiah. They search him out and they inquire where he is and they find him. The wise men from the east, using astrology, these pagan astrologers from the east, the pagan region, come to the nation of Israel to submit themselves to the king. And he says, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Each of these is a patriarch of the faith. In the kingdom of heaven, that's where these patriarchs are said to be. And these people from east and west, meaning not just Israelites, Gentiles, pagans, will come and enjoy the feast in the kingdom of heaven. Now pause. That would cause some level of offense on top of what Jesus just said. I haven't found this kind of faith. And they're like, well, he's just a Gentile. And Jesus layers more offense on that. Not that he's intentionally being offensive, but his true words cause offense. So those of faith seem to be put against those who are, in verse 12, the sons of the kingdom. Let me show you. He says, those who come from east and west will enjoy the feast in the kingdom, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. And if you're like, well, that's just like a symbol and a metaphor, in that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. At least that place or that condition Jesus is referring to is identified with this kind of gloom and weeping and gnashing of teeth, which doesn't necessarily insinuate pain, but maybe aggression, violent aggression. Either way, those of faith that come from the east and west, they're contrasted with the sons of the kingdom who are thrown into outer darkness. So we can say whatever kingdom these people belong to, it's a kingdom marked by unbelief and lack of faith. And in chapter 25, Jesus speaks of the goats and the sheep. The goats are cast into outer darkness, the eternal fire prepared for them, while the sheep inherit the kingdom of heaven prepared by God. So here's the seventh observation. The idea of Gentiles seeking God in faith brings us back to chapter 2 with the Gentile wise men and the astrologers coming to seek Jesus, following his star. It's the idea of Gentiles seeking the way God has ordained his wisdom and salvation to be sought, while the Israelites, unbelieving, rejecting Jesus, are seeking after a righteousness not by faith, just like Romans 9 through 11 speaks of. And here's the eighth observation. They're kind of lumped together. We have the two kingdoms here at odds with each other. The kingdom of heaven, right here, seems to be pit against this other kingdom that is identified with unbelief and faith. So what kingdom are these sons a part of? I want us to think about the feast in the kingdom of heaven seems to indicate that God's heavenly kingdom is overtaking the earthly one that the faithless are part of. And as we'll see in Matthew quite a bit, one kingdom is overtaking another repeatedly in this gospel. One kingdom is the national entity, the house of Israel, that earthly physical one, the ethnic one, while the other kingdom is spiritual and eternal. It's the heavenly kingdom of God that comes through faith in Jesus. And so the sons of the kingdom here seem to be part of the old fading covenant and that old house of Israel and the Israelite kingdom. Not that they have a king. Right now they're under Roman oppression. But either way, this kingdom right here seems to get assimilated into the new heavenly one, or it's removed completely, depending on if a person has faith. So if a person has faith, they'll be part of this heavenly kingdom with the patriarchs. If they're not, even if they're Israelites and ethnic descendants physically from Abraham, if they don't have faith, they will be cast out and thrown into outer darkness. And they're removed. This is like rival houses or rival kingdoms. And in chapter 12, Jesus makes this explicitly clear. And that will be a fun study because it's the unforgivable sin. And so the sons being cast out parallels all the other times in Matthew's gospel where something is taken, something is removed. Look at the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness. They're taken away, like Matthew chapter 7, when he says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." In that place, there's weeping, gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion, Jesus said, "Go." Just like the centurion said, "I have people under me, I tell them go." Jesus tells him, "Go." In faith, let it be done for you as you've believed. And it would have taken faith for this centurion to take him at his word and go back home. That's a risky journey. And the servant was healed at that very moment. The immediacy of the healing is highlighted by Matthew in both the miracle with the leper and the centurion's servant. And back to the wicked being thrown away. In Matthew's gospel, we'll see over and over the theme of something being taken or cast out or thrown away or cast aside is consistently used of something bad. We should consider these passages when trying to make sense of this statement. For example, barren branches are thrown into the fire in chapter 3. Barren trees are thrown into the fire in chapter 7. The chaff is burned up in chapter 3. Weeds are taken away and burned in chapter 13. The bad fish are taken in chapter 13 and thrown away. The useless servant is thrown away into outer darkness in chapter 25. And the useless, tasteless salt is trampled on and thrown out in chapter 5. So the question becomes, what is the deeper message behind the statement about the sons of the kingdom being thrown into the outer darkness? Here's where it is. Jesus is making it clear that being a physical descendant of Abraham does not guarantee your entrance into God's heavenly kingdom. And John validates this earlier. John the Baptist, in chapter 3, he said, hey, God can make sons of Abraham out of these stones. So as much as a Gentile needs to have faith to enter the kingdom, so does an Israelite equally need that faith. They're equally in need of salvation to come into the kingdom. Gentiles can be part of God's kingdom if they have faith, while ethnic Jews can still miss out if they don't. The nation of Israel is one house or one kingdom that is at odds with God's heavenly kingdom. And in the end, only one kingdom will stand. Just like with the story of King Nebuchadnezzar and the tree growing, or the vision he has of a stone coming out of heaven and crushing every earthly kingdom, or the parable of the mustard seed that grows and the kingdom overtakes, that's the heavenly kingdom. The nation of Israel is in danger of a great fall if they reject Jesus and remain in hard-hearted unbelief, just like Jesus said in the parable of the two builders in the last chapter. And as we'll see in chapter 12, these two kingdoms are at odds because the majority of the house of Israel refuses to obey and believe in Jesus as their Messiah. And if they refuse, they will not feast with the patriarchs that they're so proud of in eternity, but they'll be removed from the feast, as described in chapter 22 in the parable of the wedding banquet. So here's some homework for you before I build up anticipation for the next video. I want you guys to cross-reference this story with these passages to get more clarity on what Jesus means. Go read Leviticus 13 and 14 for the laws on leprosy. Go read 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1 through 14, where Elisha heals Naaman, the Syrian commander, a pagan Gentile, and he's cleansed of leprosy in the Jordan River. Go read Luke 7, 1 through 10 for the parallel account of this. Go to Matthew 15, 21 through 28 to read about the Canaanite woman's faith. Go to Numbers 12, 1 through 6 to read about Moses' sister getting leprosy. And so this is why the next section is so important. See, right after this, Jesus will heal multitudes, and he's going to heal people of demons with a word. Then he'll explain the real cost of following him by saying, hey, follow me and leave the dead to bury their dead. And we're left confused and wondering, why does Jesus say this to us, a man who just wants to follow him after burying his father? What does Jesus really mean? What is he getting at? And what is the deeper message Jesus is giving us about discipleship and faith? Make sure you watch the next video to find out. Hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more biblical content just like this. We have hundreds of videos, but you might be most interested in these ones right here. Also, visit our website for all of our free resources and classes. And thank you so much for partnering with us financially to make this ministry even possible. Keep moving towards Jesus, and I'll see you in the next video.